boardroom doors swung open with a whisper of authority, and there she was, tall, commanding, her presence cutting through the hum of corporate chatter like a blade. She locked eyes with him across the polished table, her gaze sharp enough to slice through steel. "Remember throwing my mom out?" she murmured, leaning in just close enough for only him to hear, her voice a sultry mix of venom and something dangerously intimate. David Harrington, the billionaire at the helm of Apex Global, felt his world tilt. His hand froze mid-gesture, the room's executives oblivious as they shuffled papers. But he knew. Those words dragged him back to a decision he'd buried deep, one that now stared him down in the form of this stunning woman, Sophia Grant, his newest board member. Welcome back to Mr. Cael's Stories, where we dive into tales that tug at your heartstrings and leave you thinking long after they're done. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our family of story lovers. We're all about those moments that make you feel alive, inspired, and maybe a little wiser. To my amazing subscribers, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your likes, comments, and shares. You keep this channel thriving. Let's make today's story one for the books. Drop a like if you've ever questioned trust in a relationship, and comment below, what's the biggest secret you've uncovered in love? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Now let's get into it. David Harrington stood tall at the head of the massive mahogany table in the Apex Global boardroom, a space that screamed power with its floor-to-ceiling windows, framing the endless sprawl of Manhattan below. The morning light streamed in, casting long shadows across the polished surface where laptops and notepads were already set up for the quarterly meeting. At 42, David had sculpted his life into something unbreakable. A tech empire born from countless late nights in a cramped garage apartment, fueled by nothing but sheer determination and a vision that refused to fade. Now, Apex Global was a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut, reshaping industries from artificial intelligence to cloud computing, with tendrils reaching into every corner of the digital world. His blue eyes, sharp and framed by the faint creases of years spent in high-stakes negotiations, scanned the room with the precision of a strategist plotting his next move. Broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored navy suit that hugged his athletic build, honed from early morning runs along the Hudson, David exuded the kind of quiet charisma that could turn skeptics into loyal allies or silence a room with a single glance. But on this particular crisp autumn morning, as the quarterly board meeting geared up with the usual buzz of arriving executives exchanging pleasantries over steaming coffee, nothing in his meticulously controlled world could have prepared him for the woman who walked through those double doors. Sophia Grant entered the room like she owned every inch of it, her steps measured and confident, echoing slightly on the marble floor. She was dressed in a fitted crimson suit that accentuated every graceful curve of her figure. Tailored to perfection, the jacket nipped at the waist and the skirt falling just above the knee, paired with sleek black heels that added to her already commanding height. Her dark hair cascaded in loose, effortless waves over her shoulders, catching the overhead lights from the crystal chandeliers and giving her an almost ethereal glow. But it was her gray eyes, deep, stormy, and unyielding, that swept the room with a calculated intensity before locking directly onto David's. There was a fire there, a depth that hinted at stories untold, and in that moment, David felt an inexplicable pull, a mix of professional curiosity and something far more personal stirring within him. Sophia had been hired for her pioneering work in sustainable technology. Poached from a leading European firm where she'd spearheaded breakthroughs in eco-friendly algorithms and green data centers. Her resume was a powerhouse. Degrees from top universities, patents under her belt, and a track record of turning environmentally risky projects into sustainable successes. She promised to elevate Apex's aggressive expansion plans by infusing them with the kind of forward-thinking ethics that could appeal to increasingly conscious investors. Yet, beneath that polished professional veneer, David sensed an undercurrent, a personal edge that made the air in the room feel just a tad thicker, heavier with unspoken intent. As she took her seat at the table, directly across from him, the meeting officially kicked off. The room was filled with the low murmur of greetings winding down, chairs scraping as everyone settled in, laptops whirring to life. David cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the remaining chatter with authority. "Good morning, team. Let's dive right in. Our latest AI acquisition is poised to redefine the market. Projections are showing a potential 40% growth spike in the next quarter alone, with integration timelines accelerating thanks to our new partnerships. He clicked through his presentation slides on the massive screen behind him, weaving in detailed data points, market analyses, and strategic visions that had the room nodding in agreement. Executives jotted notes, some leaning forward with interest, the atmosphere charged with the familiar energy of big ideas colliding. But as David spoke, outlining the synergies between the acquired firm's neural networks and Apex's existing platforms, his focus kept drifting, subtly, almost against his will, to Sophia. She sat there with a leather-bound notebook in front of her, her pen tapping lightly against the page in a rhythmic pattern that seemed deliberate, thoughtful. She listened intently at first, her expression neutral, but when opportunities arose for input, she didn't hesitate. The floor opened for discussion after David's opener, and Sophia was the first to jump in, her voice carrying a melodic confidence that immediately drew every eye in the room. "Those growth projections are impressive, Mr. Harrington," she began, leaning forward slightly so her words carried even more weight, her tone smooth yet laced with an undeniable edge. "But let's not gloss over the potential downsides. This AI rollout, as ambitious as it is, could spike our overall energy consumption and carbon footprint by at least 25% if we don't integrate renewable solutions from the ground up. In my previous role, I led similar large-scale implementations, where ignoring sustainability led to not just operational inefficiencies, but real-world backlash, regulatory hurdles from governments pushing for greener tech, public outcry from environmental groups, and even investor pullouts. We can't afford to repeat those mistakes here." David leaned back in his chair, his interest genuinely piqued. Her point was solid, backed by experience, but the way she delivered it felt like a direct probe into his leadership style, a subtle challenge that made the room shift uncomfortably for a split second. "A valid concern, Ms. Grant," he replied, his voice steady as he met her gaze head-on. "Sustainability has been on our radar, but your expertise is exactly why we brought you aboard. What specific integrations would you recommend to mitigate that? Solar microgrids for our data centers, perhaps, or something more innovative?" She nodded, pulling up a quick digital sketch on her tablet and sharing it to the screen for all to see. A detailed flow chart of phased implementations, complete with cost-benefit analyses and projected ROI timelines. "Exactly. Pairing solar microgrids with AI-optimized energy management systems could cut emissions by up to 30% while actually boosting operational efficiency. I've got case studies from projects in Dubai and Berlin where this approach not only met but exceeded regulatory standards, turning potential liabilities into competitive advantages. For Apex, we could start with a pilot in our East Coast facilities, scaling based on real-time data. The exchange flowed like a well-choreographed dance, her responses quick and insightful, his counters measured but engaging, building on her ideas rather than dismissing them. The other board members chimed in here and there, questions about budgeting from the CFO, concerns about timelines from operations. But it was clear to everyone that this was primarily a dialogue between David and Sophia. Their synergy sparked a buzz in the room, idea bouncing back and forth with increasing energy. One member even joked, "If this is what our new board dynamic looks like, we're in for some exciting times." Laughter rippled, breaking the tension, but David felt it deeper. A spark of intellectual chemistry that hinted at something more, a connection that went beyond the charts and figures on the screen. As the meeting stretched on, delving into finer details like vendor partnerships and risk assessments, Sophia's contributions shone, her passion for balancing innovation with responsibility evident in every word. By the time they adjourned 2 hours later, with applause rippling through the space for the approved strategies and next steps, David knew this wasn't over. Sophia Grant had just upended his carefully controlled boardroom, and he needed to understand why and what it meant for him. He caught her in the bustling hallway outside the boardroom, where executives were milling about with fresh coffee in hand, discussing follow-ups in hushed tones. "Ms. Grant," he called out, his voice cutting through the chatter without effort. She turned, and up close, her presence was even more intoxicating. The subtle scent of her perfume, a light jasmine with an underlying spice, the intelligence sparkling in those gray eyes like a challenge waiting to be met. "That was outstanding in there," he continued, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the elevators. "Your insights could be a real game changer for us. I'd like to discuss them further. My office is just down the hall, if you have a few minutes." She hesitated for just a beat, her eyes assessing him with that same unreadable depth, before nodding with a small, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Of course, Mr. Harrington, lead the way. The walk to his corner office was short, but felt loaded with unspoken words, the click of her heels on the tiled floor syncing oddly with his own steady strides. Once inside, he closed the door behind them, the sound echoing softly in the sudden privacy, creating an intimate bubble away from the corporate frenzy outside. The office was a true sanctuary of modern luxury, sleek minimalist furniture in dark woods and chrome, abstract art pieces on the walls that he'd collected from galleries around the world, and that breathtaking panoramic view of the Hudson River sparkling under the midday sun, boats dotting the water like tiny specks in a vast canvas. He gestured to one of the plush leather chairs opposite his massive desk. Make yourself comfortable. Can I get you something? Coffee, tea, or perhaps something stronger to celebrate a productive morning? Water's fine, thank you, she replied, settling into the chair but not fully relaxing, her posture remaining alert and composed, as if she were ready for whatever came next. He poured a glass from the crystal pitcher on his sideboard, handing it to her with a deliberate brush of fingers that sent an unexpected spark up his arm, a fleeting touch that felt charged, intentional. They clinked glasses lightly in a mock toast. To productive partnerships, he said, but his tone held a layer of curiosity, a question lingering beneath the surface. She sipped slowly, her eyes never leaving his, then set the glass down with purpose on the small table between them. Partnerships built on what, exactly? Transparency or convenient forgetfulness? The words hung in the air like a challenge, echoing the whisper she delivered in the boardroom, and David felt the shift immediately, the conversation veering from professional to profoundly personal. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, deciding to meet her head on. All right, let's address the elephant in the room. Your mother, Miriam Grant. The Boston acquisition, 15 years ago. I didn't make the connection until your words in the meeting hit me. It was a rough time for the company. We were on the brink of bankruptcy. I had to make cuts to save what little we had left. Sophia's expression tightened, a flicker of raw emotion crossing her features, pain flashing in her eyes, anger tightening her jaw, but also a vulnerability that tugged at something deep within him, something he hadn't felt in years. She sipped her water again, as if buying time to compose her response, then placed the glass down with a soft clink. Cuts? That's how you frame it? She wasn't just a line item on a spreadsheet, David. She was a dedicated employee, a single mother who stood in an office much like this one, begging for her job. She told you about her daughter, me just 13 at the time, depending on her for everything. You looked her in the eye and said the company couldn't afford sentiment. We ended up on the street because of that decision. Mom broke under the weight of it all, depression setting in like a fog she couldn't shake, scraping by with whatever part-time jobs she could find just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I watched her fight every single day, her spirit dimming a little more with each rejection, each bill that piled up. And all the while you were building this empire, stepping over people like us without a second thought. The words landed heavy, stirring a guilt he'd long suppressed in the recesses of his mind. Back then, he was a 27-year-old CEO, ruthless in his climb, cutting costs left and right to keep the doors open amid a sea of red ink and creditor calls. I was fighting for survival, he admitted quietly, his voice carrying the weight of hindsight. The firm was bleeding money, investors pulling out. I thought every concession could be the one that sank us. But hearing it now from you, I see the human cost I ignored. I'm sorry for the pain it caused your family, for what it did to you. Sorry? She stood abruptly, pacing to the window where she gazed out at the river, her back to him, arms crossed as if holding herself together. Her reflection in the glass showed the conflict on her face, the strong woman she'd become warring with, the hurt girl she'd been. Words are easy when you're sitting at the top, looking down from your tower. I built my entire career to stand here, in a room like this, to make men like you see the faces behind your decisions, to prove that resilience isn't just a buzzword, it's what gets you through when everything's stripped away. He rose too, approaching slowly from behind, stopping a few feet away to give her space. And you've done it brilliantly, Sophia. Your work speaks for itself. But why Apex? Why come to my company of all places? Is it revenge or something else? She turned to face him, the distance between them now mere inches, close enough that he could see the flecks of silver in her gray eyes. the way her chest rose and fell with emotion. Maybe a bit of both. I wanted you to see me, really see what your choices were, to feel a fraction of the uncertainty, the loss of control that we endured. But now, being here, seeing you up close, it's more complicated than I thought. The air between them crackled with tension, a magnetic pull that neither could ignore. David's hand reached out almost of its own accord, touching her shoulder lightly, feeling the warmth of her skin through the fabric of her suit. I see you now, he murmured, his voice low and rough, and then, as if pulled by an invisible force neither could resist, he leaned in. Their lips met in a kiss that started tentative, exploratory, a brush of softness that quickly ignited into something fiercer, more urgent. Her hands came up to clutch his shirt, pulling him closer as if anchoring herself in the storm of emotions, while his arms wrapped around her waist, drawing her flush against him. The world outside, the bustling city, the empire he'd built, faded away. It was just the heat of her body molding to his, the taste of her lips, a desire that had been simmering beneath the surface since her very first glance in the boardroom. They broke apart eventually, both breathing heavily, her forehead resting against his chest for a moment as they caught their breath. "This is a mistake," she whispered, her voice husky, fingers still lingering on his shirt as if unwilling to let go completely. "Or the start of something we both need," he replied, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw, tilting her face up to meet his eyes again. There was no denying the connection now. It was electric, undeniable, a spark that promised to burn bright or consume them both. From that pivotal kiss in his office, their lives began to intertwine in ways neither David nor Sophia could have fully anticipated. The professional realm took on a new layer of complexity, with their boardroom interactions now laced with secret glances and subtle touches that no one else seemed to notice. But that set their pulses racing every time. Sophia threw herself into her role with vigor, leading task forces on integrating sustainable practices into Apex's core operations. She organized workshops for the executive team, presenting detailed reports on how green tech could not only reduce costs, but also open new revenue streams through eco-certifications and partnerships with environmental organizations. David backed her every step, championing her ideas in high-level meetings, their synergy becoming the talk of the company. "Grant and Harrington are a powerhouse duo," one VP remarked during a lunch break, and David couldn't help but smile inwardly, knowing the truth ran so much deeper. But it was the nights that truly defined their evolving bond, the stolen moments away from the office lights and prying eyes. Their first real date came a week after that kiss, a quiet dinner at a hidden French bistro in the West Village, where the ambiance was intimate with soft lighting and the aroma of fresh herbs and wine filling the air. They sat in a corner booth, away from the main crowd, and as the waiter poured their Cabernet, David reached across the table to take her hand. "Tell me more about you, the real you, not the boardroom version." Sophia hesitated, swirling her wine glass, but the warmth in his eyes coaxed her open. "Growing up after everything, I was determined. Scholarships got me through college, late nights studying while mom worked doubles. I majored in environmental engineering because I saw how corporate decisions affected real lives, the pollution from unchecked industries, the health issues in communities like ours. It became my mission." He listened intently, sharing his own backstory in return. "I was the kid from the wrong side of the tracks. Dad bailed when I was 10, mom a waitress pulling triple shifts. Success was my escape hatch, but it turned me hard. I lost friends, relationships, all in the name of building Apex. Until now, I didn't realize how empty that left me." Their conversation flowed late into the night, vulnerability peeling back layers. As they walked out into the cool evening air, he pulled her into a shadowed alley for a kiss that started sweet but grew heated, his hands sliding under her coat to feel the curve of her waist, her body pressing against his in response. "Come back to my place," he whispered against her lips. She nodded, and the cab ride was tense with anticipation. His penthouse was a realm of understated opulence, high ceilings with recessed lighting, panoramic views of the twinkling city skyline, a kitchen that rivaled Michelin star restaurants with marble counters and state-of-the-art appliances. They barely made it through the door before passion took over. In the living room, with soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, he backed her against the wall, kissing her deeply as hands explored. "You're addictive," he murmured, his mouth trailing down her neck, nipping gently at the sensitive skin there, drawing a soft gasp from her. She tugged at his shirt, buttons flying as she pushed it off his shoulders, her fingers tracing the defined muscles of his chest. Show me how much. They moved to the bedroom, a spacious sanctuary with a king-size bed draped in silk sheets, the city lights filtering through sheer curtains. Clothes shed in a trail, he laid her down gently, his eyes drinking in her form, the swell of her hips, the smooth expanse of her skin. He kissed his way down, lingering on her breasts, tongue circling until she arched with a moan. Lower still between her thighs, he tasted her intimately, slow and deliberate, his hands holding her steady as pleasure built in waves, her fingers tangling in his hair, guiding him until she shattered with a cry. Then joining her, he entered slowly, savoring the connection, their rhythm syncing as if they'd been lovers for years. Her nails grazed his back, urging him deeper, their eyes locked in shared intensity, whispers of names and endearments filling the air. In the aftermath, wrapped in sheets and each other's arms, she curled against him. "What are we doing, David?" "Falling. Hard," he replied, kissing her forehead, a sense of peace washing over him for the first time in forever. As weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened, weaving romance into the fabric of their daily lives. Mornings often started with shared coffee in his kitchen, her in one of his shirts, discussing the day's agenda over fresh fruit and croissants. "Your presentation today. Nail it," he'd say, kissing her goodbye with a promise of dinner later. Professionally, they balanced it carefully. No favoritism, but their ideas fed off each other. Sophia launched a company-wide initiative for carbon-neutral operations, David approving budgets that made it possible. Team meetings buzzed with their dynamic, inspiring others. But shadows from the past crept in. One evening after a long day, Sophia arrived at his penthouse with a folder in hand, the archived emails she'd discovered during an audit. They detailed Miriam's desperate pleas, medical notes about early signs of illness, and David's curt dismissals. No exceptions, focus on core restructuring. She confronted him in the living room, the city lights casting long shadows as she paced. "You knew she was starting to get sick. The reports mentioned fatigue, doctor visits, and you ignored it all for the bottom line?" David's face paled as he read the printouts, the guilt crashing over him like a wave. "I vaguely remember. I was overwhelmed, Sophia. Creditors calling daily, the board breathing down my neck. I thought it was just another story to pull at heartstrings. I was wrong, horribly, unforgivably wrong. But that was the old me." Tears welled in her eyes as she turned away. "The old you destroyed my family. How can I separate that from the man I'm falling for? This poisons everything we've built." He crossed to her, turning her gently to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "You don't have to forgive overnight, but let me prove I've changed. Every day, in every way." The kiss that followed was desperate, a plea wrapped in passion, her resistance melting as their bodies pressed together. Clothes came off in a frenzy, him lifting her onto the couch, entering her with urgency, their movements frantic and raw, a release of all the pent-up emotion. She clung to him, her moans mixing with sobs, until they both shattered, collapsing in a tangle of limbs. Afterwards, she rested her head on his chest, whispering, "I need time to process this." "Take all you need," he said, holding her tight, his heart aching with regret, but hopeful for redemption. The separation was brief but agonizing for both. David threw himself into work, but thoughts of her consumed his every quiet moment. He began researching Miriam's story more deeply, contacting former colleagues from the Boston firm, piecing together the full impact of his decisions. He learned details he'd never known, how Miriam had volunteered at local shelters even while struggling, how she'd encouraged Sophia's education despite everything. It humanized the past, fueling his determination to make amends. Meanwhile, Sophia grappled at home in her sleek apartment overlooking the park, rereading her mother's old letters and journals. One entry stood out. "Forgiveness isn't for them, it's for us to free our hearts for better things." It shifted something in her, softening the edges of her anger. A week later, she texted him, "Meet me at our park bench." They walked the winding paths of Central Park, leaves crunching underfoot in the fall air, the scent of roasted chestnuts from vendors wafting by. "I found Mom's journals," Sophia said, linking her arm with his. "She forgave you years ago, long before she passed. She wrote that holding grudges poisons the holder more than anyone else. Maybe it's time I try that too." David stopped, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "And you, can you forgive me?" "I'm working on it," she replied, her eyes soft as she kissed him lightly. Their walk continued, conversations turning to lighter topics, favorite books, childhood dreams, rebuilding trust layer by layer. Renewed and stronger, their relationship blossomed with even greater intention. David surprised her with spontaneous weekend getaways, like a cozy cabin in the Adirondacks where snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in white. They spent days hiking through crisp forests, hand in hand, sharing stories of past travels and future aspirations. By the roaring fire in the evenings, with hot cocoa in hand, he opened up more. I never let anyone in before you, walls up always. You crack them wide open. She straddled him on the rug, her sweater slipping off one shoulder. Let me in deeper. The night unfolded slowly, kisses that lingered, his hands exploring under her clothes with reverence, bringing her to gentle peaks of pleasure before they joined, moving in tandem by the firelight, whispers of affection punctuating the rhythm. Back in the city, their professional lives intertwined seamlessly. Sophia pitched a major green overhaul at an international tech conference, David by her side on stage, their partnership earning standing ovations and media buzz. Apex is leading the charge in ethical innovation, headlines read, crediting their dynamic duo. But jealousy added spice when a charming rival executive from a competing firm flirted with Sophia at a gala event, his compliments laced with intent. David pulled her aside into a private garden later, the night air cool. Seeing him that close to you, it drove me crazy, he admitted, his voice low. She laughed softly, pressing against him. Jealous? I like it. Their hotel suite that night was charged with possession, kisses turning fierce, him pinning her against the door, hands roaming as clothes were discarded. He entered her with a growl, her legs wrapping around his waist, their movements intense and rhythmic, climaxes building until they cried out together, collapsing in satisfied exhaustion. Another layer of depth came when Sophia experienced a recurring health scare, exhaustion and symptoms that echoed her mother's early warnings, tied to the high-stress demands of her role and their complicated romance. Panicked after a doctor's visit, she confided in David over a quiet lunch at a seaside cafe during a business trip to California. The ocean waves crashed in the background as they sat on the patio, her hand trembling slightly as she shared the results. It's stress-related, but it scares me, thinking it could be more, like Mom. He took her hand across the table, his thumb stroking her palm reassuringly. We're in this together. We'll adjust schedules, get the best specialists. You don't have to carry it alone. That afternoon, they skipped the next meeting, opting for a walk along the beach instead, bare feet in the sand, talking through fears and plans. Back at their hotel, the intimacy was healing, slow, tender touches in the jacuzzi, his mouth exploring her body with care under the bubbles, bringing her to waves of release that washed away the anxiety. They made love on the balcony as the sun set, her on top gazing down at him, bodies moving in perfect harmony, affirming their bond. Inspired by her vulnerability and his own regrets, David quietly launched a charitable foundation in Miriam's name, dedicated to supporting single parents in the tech industry facing layoffs or health challenges, providing financial aid, counseling, and job placement services. He surprised Sophia with the news during a romantic dinner cruise on the Hudson, the boat gliding smoothly through the water as city lights twinkled like stars around them. A string quartet played softly in the background, and over champagne and lobster, he handed her the official documents. This is for her, for you, a way to turn the past into something positive. Her eyes filled with tears as she read through it. David, this means everything. The evening ended in his private suite on the boat, passion reigniting under the moonlight, her dress slipping off as they moved to the bed, him worshiping her body with kisses from head to toe, their union deep and affirming, whispers of I love you slipping out for the first time amid the ecstasy. But doubt still lingered in quieter moments. Sophia discovered more of her mother's journals during a visit to her old family home, entries revealing Miriam had followed David's career from afar, even admiring his tenacity while forgiving his mistakes. He was young, driven by fear, one page read. We all make choices we regret. It shifted Sophia's perspective further, leading to a heartfelt conversation with David in a cozy cafe near her apartment, rain pattering against the windows. Mom saw the good in you, even then. Maybe I need to trust that. David squeezed her hand across the table. With you, I want to be that man. Every day. Forever. Their emotional peak came with the pregnancy reveal, discovered during a routine checkup amid her health monitoring. In a sunlit park bench one spring afternoon, birds chirping overhead, she placed his hand on her still flat belly. "We're having a baby. It's unexpected, but it's us." Joy overwhelmed him, his eyes misting as he knelt before her. "Our family. Marry me, Sophia. Let me build this life with you, with our child." Tears of happiness streamed down her face as she said yes, but she insisted on time to process fully. Away from the city's chaos, they escaped to his private island villa in the Caribbean for an extended retreat, white sandy beaches and turquoise waters serving as a backdrop for weeks of soul-searching and bonding. Days blended into long walks along the shore, hand in hand, discussing names for the baby, dreams for their future, and how they'd balance family with their careers. They snorkeled in crystal-clear reefs, laughing as colorful fish darted around them and picnicked under palm trees, sharing stories of what parenthood might bring. Nights were pure magic, candlelit dinners on the terrace with fresh seafood caught that day, leading to passionate encounters under the stars. One memorable evening, after a sunset swim, they returned to the villa dripping wet, towels dropping as he carried her to the bedroom. "You're glowing, yeah," he whispered. Laying her on the sheets, his mouth tracing water droplets down her body, lingering between her thighs until she arched in ecstasy. They explored new intimacies, slow, sensual massages with scented oils, her hands guiding him, climaxes building in layers until they shattered together, bodies and souls entwined. During quieter times, doubts were aired openly. "What if my past makes me a bad father?" he confessed one night, stars twinkling above as they lay on a hammock. She cupped his face. "Your past made you who you are, the man I love, who's already proving he'll be amazing." Their conversations wove through fears of repeating mistakes, commitments to ethical living, and excitement for the changes ahead. The wedding was an intimate affair back on the island. Months later, as her belly began to show, a beachside ceremony at sunset with close friends and family flown in, the ocean waves providing a natural soundtrack. Vows were exchanged with tears and laughter. "You turned my world upside down in the best way," David said, slipping the ring on her finger. "I promise to cherish you, our child, and the life we're creating." Sophia beamed, her hand on her bump. "From adversaries to this, love's journey has been our greatest adventure." Years passed in a blur of joy and growth. Their daughter, named Mira after Miriam, grew into a curious toddler with Sophia's eyes and David's determination, chasing butterflies in their Hamptons garden, or learning about sustainable tech from her parents' stories. Apex evolved under their joint leadership, becoming a model for ethical corporate practices, implementing global green initiatives, mentoring programs for underrepresented talent, and family-friendly policies that reflected their values. Flashbacks often surfaced in quiet family moments. David teaching Mira to code on a sunny afternoon, remembering his own garage days. Sophia reading bedtime stories, echoing Miriam's nurturing spirit. Subplots enriched their life. A corporate sabotage attempt from a disgruntled ex-employee tested their unity, but they navigated it together, emerging stronger. David reconciled with his estranged mother, inviting her into their world, healing old family wounds. Sophia mentored young women in tech, establishing scholarships that changed lives, fulfilling her promise to rise above. Daily intimacies kept their romance alive. Morning coffees turning into tender embraces, evening baths where hands wandered freely, building to passionate reunions that reaffirmed their bond. Business trips became mini honeymoons, hotel rooms transformed into playgrounds of desire, role-playing fantasies, teasing builds leading to explosive climaxes. Friends and colleagues noticed the transformation. Dinners with other couples where their chemistry sparked envy, their story inspiring others to seek balance between ambition and heart. A near-miss health crisis for David, stress from a major deal, mirrored Sophia's earlier scare, drawing them closer as she nursed him back, their love a anchor. Holidays blended traditions, Thanksgivings with elaborate feasts honoring Miriam's recipes, Christmases with sustainable gifts and family volunteering. Mira's first steps, first words, milestones celebrated with joy, captured in photos that lined their home. In quieter nights, as Mira slept, they reflected on the porch, stars above. "We turn pain into this beautiful life," Sophia said, leaning into him. He kissed her temple. "And I'll love you through every chapter." Extended family gatherings, business expansions into new markets with ethical focuses, personal growth through therapy, and retreats, all wove into their tapestry. Conflicts like work-life balance debates were met with open communication, always ending in reconciliation and intimacy. Their legacy grew, Mira starting school, showing early signs of her parents' brilliance, Apex winning awards for sustainability, charitable work impacting thousands. Through it all, their love remained the core, fierce, tender, enduring. Hey, if this epic journey of love and redemption has you hooked this far, pause and like the video. It spreads the inspiration. Comment, what's your biggest takeaway on forgiveness? Share to connect and subscribe for more heartfelt sagas. And there you have it, a sweeping epic of how confronting shadows leads to radiant futures, teaching that vulnerability forges unbreakable bonds, and love's embrace mends the deepest divides. If this moved you, like, share, subscribe, and comment your favorite part. Thanks for the ride. Next story soon.